Well, hey, everybody. Dave Pomeroy here. We've got an amazing guest today, somebody who I've been listening to for a long time and still out there doing great stuff. The great Jimmy Hall, y'all.
Yes, sir. Here I am.
Yep. Well, we're glad to have
in
you.
Person.
And you've been doing this a long time. But let's just start at the beginning. So you grew up in Mobile, Alabama?
I grew up in Mobile, Alabama. Back then, even smaller town. Actually was born in Birmingham, and we lived there a couple years before my dad got a job down in Mobile, and we moved down there.
Yeah.
And
so did you have a musical family? Did your family play music, your folks, or they were fans?
I was born into a musical family, especially through my mother and my mother's side, because she was a singer. She grew up singing and played piano in church, and sang in high school, and just loved it. I mean, later on, she was always in the choir, and whatever, in our little church that was a couple blocks away from our house when I was growing up. But her parents played, when she was growing up, her parents played in their local Baptist church up near Birmingham. Well, she was raised in Tuscaloosa. My dad born in Birmingham. And her dad was a bass singer and a deacon in the church. And
wow.
Her mother, Mattie Lou Richardson, played the pump organ.
There's an art to that for sure. It's kind of like an exercise bike, you know.
Yeah. It's like a sewing machine.
Yeah. An accordion with your feet.
Yeah. Yeah, really. And so she grew up around music and just loved it. She was in the female version of Barbershop Quartet. And I think there are kind of associations all over the country called Sweet Adelines, the Sweet Adelines.
Wow.
She did that as kind of a hobby and for fun. But she was always very supportive of the talent that she saw in me. And my dad was too. He didn't have he wanted to try to play some music, but he didn't just have that talent. He didn't have he really wasn't much of a singer, but he tried. And, but his father, my grandfather, he died early, or I never really got to meet him, but I learned later that he played the French harp and the harmonica.
Okay.
They call it the French harp back then. And, that kind of inspired me to take it up.
Yeah. So was a lot of that music through the church? At first?
Yes. And also I want to give more credit to my dad as far as the music that we heard at home and that was played on the radio and some little stereos that dad had.
Right.
Some record player, played some vinyl, because he loved all kinds of music. And we had records by Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis, and then Ray Charles and Sam Cooke.
Right.
And gospel music, and we're, close to New Orleans. So he loved New Orleans jazz, Al Hurt and Pete Fountain and that whole Dixieland.
Yeah, my dad was a big Dixieland fan. He was very briefly a drummer, but never pursued it. He went into the military, but he was always a music fan. And I think that was part of my, inspiration was just, Louis Armstrong, some of those records. Those New Orleans records were so, they were just like so accessible, so in your face,
Domino,
Yeah.
I mean, who really broke out nationally so much. That stuff was on the radio. And see, Mobile was also had Mardi Gras, and it was the first city to have Mardi Gras before even New Orleans. But there was a lot of that music around, just in the parade.
That culture, being close to the river. That's great. And so your older brother started playing music.
Yeah. So Jack is 2 years older, so he kind of led the way. He was like, sometimes it's like, no, that's not the way you do it. This is the big brother. No, let me show you how it's supposed to be done, you know.
Right.
But he led by example too, and he was really smart, really great at school, and so I try to keep up with that. But
so he encouraged you.
He encouraged me, but also we were very close. And at some point, I'm trying to remember about when he got this guitar, but this guitar is still in my old home back in Mobile. It's kind of part of the legacy.
Yeah.
But it's an okay acoustic.
Sure.
And Jack said, I want to learn how to play guitar. So my dad got it for him. My dad was supportive and helping. Okay, you're serious about this? Let me get you one and see what you do with it.
Right.
So he learned, taught himself how to play guitar. And then that became, his name's Jack, but was like the Jimmy and Jackie show. The Jackie and Jimmy. Jimmy and Jackie, come out here and play something for our friends over here. You know, my parents have a gathering.
Right.
Come on out here and play for your uncles and aunts and things.
Oh, that's great.
So at that point, I was singing some in church, but singing at school, they encouraged the music here, you know, the little musicals and programs at school.
Right.
In Mertz grade school. And the first memory of doing something public like that, a little show, was in the 4th grade. The parents helped put on a little fashion show. And so dressing us up in this gear and this gear. So me and actually this girl was kind of sweet on, named Susan Rouillet. They wanted us to do Singing in the Rain, just like in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And wear this rain gear, like this yellow, you know,
the poncho,
and boots and all that, and singing in the rain, and holding. You know, we had to do a little dance, so it was step, brush, 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 slide. I'll never forget. Step to the left. So we worked on this little routine, and then we did that, and I got out there, and I guess I just felt at home. I wasn't, and my mom helped, you know, we rehearsed it a lot, but that was one of the first times I got in front of the audience, and I just did it.
And you felt comfortable.
I felt, well, I'm going to continue that story about that school and how they encouraged the music. And so that was the 4th grade, and then the 5th grade, they were very adventurous, I guess. They wanted to try and put on a musical. So they wanted to do HMS Pinafore, Gilbert and Sullivan.
Right.
English Navy and, you know, these little dances.
English Navy and Mobile.
and so I became, they wanted me to do the lead. One of the main leads was Ralph Rackstraw. Okay, he's a guy that, in the story, these two people, the babies were mixed up, and Ralph Rackstraw actually is the captain of the ship, but he doesn't know it because somewhere in the way back, the babies were switched, or the birth certificate, or it was a big mix-up. So he's the captain. This guy is the captain of the ship, and he's like lording over me and everything. And then there's the love interest of the girl, Buttercup, and she was played by my neighbor, Marsha Torbett. So we got to rehearse, just going over to each other's house and let's sing our parts together and say our lines. But in the end, it was thrilling. And I was up there, kind of the star of the show, and my brother's singing in the chorus or helping out down there.
Mm-hmm.
And he sang, but it wasn't his big forte. He was musical,
mm-hmm.
and we played music together later. But that, I tell this story sometimes because being on the stage, singing and acting, that part was harder, but I like doing it. And I was saying, you know, I feel pretty at home right now. And they like me, you know.
Yeah.
That's how they feel. They really love me.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
that acceptance, I think, when you're, you know, it helps when you're a kid, you don't build up the kind of nervousness that you might as an adult. if you haven't done it when you're a kid,
Right.
your filters are a lot more open. And I think you feel comfortable, you feel empowered. It's great.
Yeah. And being that young, you want to learn some new things, and your brain's still absorbing a lot of stuff.
It never stops. But it's interesting when you're a kid, because I know for me, those teenage years were, just trying to figure out a way to do what those guys on TV were doing. And, and I had a lot of hit and miss, but it sounds like your situation was very encouraging and very kind of empowering.
Yeah.
To be able to do that at a young age and go, yeah, I'm comfortable out here playing an English Navy character, in the middle of Alabama. That's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And looking back, I will always look at who were my support team, who was the wind beneath my wings. My mother, who especially later on as I got more acclaim or success in the business, it was vicariously living. That would be me. Hey, that's my boy, that whole thing.
That's great.
And so that was a milestone. Sixth grade, I go kind of by sixth grade, they offered violin lessons. And so I tried the acting and the singing, and wasn't playing any particular instrument. My mom played piano. I don't know if I added that. And she would play church and gospel, and then turn around and play Alexander's Ragtime Band or In the Mood. Or
so she knew the repertoire.
Especially things that came through New Orleans, and that she had a stride left hand that she learned from a wonderful black lady that she knew lived in her neighborhood. It taught her some boogie woogie.
Nice.
But I just had these people behind me. So in sixth grade, they offered violin, a lesson once a week for certain students that they culled us out between people that had an ear. They wanted you to have some success. Well, you had to have a good ear. You really couldn't. But once a week lessons during that year, we learned the basics and how to stay in tune. And we learned the pizzicato polka and 3 and 4 note melodies. And my violin teacher, she really saw some promise in me. And I was enjoying it. But 7th grade came along, and see, my brother 2 years ahead of me, he was already in a junior high band. So they offered the band instruments. And so he had joined the band playing clarinet over in the junior high school. And so when I'm moving up, this is when you're in 6th grade, then 7th, 8th, 9th.
Sure.
So he says, okay, you're coming to junior high. Why don't you try out for band? I'm in the band. It couldn't hurt.
Yeah.
So I talked to the band teacher, and she said, what are you interested in? And my mom had some influence, but she just said, I love the saxophone. I wish you could learn that. Well, I picked up not only did I picked up the alto, and I played a rented instrument for a while, because that's really what you could do. And it was not the best alto in the world, one of these old silver ones, a Con or something, and not quite in tune all the time. But I learned on it. And then my band teacher, I think, what was her name? Miss Bassett. She saw some promise in me, and she came to me and said, I want to meet with you and your parents, because I got a horn I think you're going to want to look at. I said, good. I told my folks,
nice.
Miss Bassett wants to come over and show you a horn. So she came over here to the house and showed me and my parents, and I hadn't seen it. And she opened it up, and it was a Selmer Mark VI alto sax that she found with some damage on it, just some dings and some pretty, some repair work had to be done.
Probably a few stories in there.
Yeah, right, a lot of stories, but in good shape mechanically. And she said, this horn you know, it's worth a good amount of money, but I can make a deal for you. And she sold it to us for $300.
Wow.
And this, I can't tell the year. I mean,
yeah,
let's do the math, whatever. It was in the 50s.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's a beautiful horn. It's going to be great. And so, you know, she took care of the repairs on it and, you know, put that in the price. But I love that horn. And when my dad, my buddy said, no, son, you got to take good care of this horn because that's about as much you could buy a used car for that. You know,
right.
Like, you know, so I said, oh, okay.
Yeah, $300 was a lot of money back then.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And so I really enjoyed the junior high years and playing that horn. And I kept it for a long time. And along the way, traded for another one and this and that. But I enjoyed the marching songs, the alma mater and different things that we learned, the patriotic songs. But we also had a stage band. They call it stage band or jazz band.
Yeah.
And you could volunteer for it, or they would say, you ought to try it. So they wanted me to try it. And I just loved that music. You know, my mom and dad listened to great jazz and big band stuff. They grew up with that. So I got into the stage band, and it was one of those things that some of the folks, some of the guys and girls couldn't improvise.
Right.
So we were reading everything on the page, and and then say sax solo, and some of these people couldn't hear it, or it's like, what do I do?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. Well, somehow, also having a good ear and singing some already, I could do it, or I figured out how to do it. And I said, well, okay, play in the key and just.
Yeah, play the blues.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about alto player, the song was Tough.
Oh, I know the song. I'm trying to think of the guy's name.
We're going to look it up later.
Okay.
Well, but that was one of those kind of things.
Well, they were simple melodic tunes in that era.
Yeah, between that and Sentimental Journey, I was like,
right.
I like these jazzy kind of songs, and with a little bit of the blues, which I was just discovering, I think.
Yeah, well, it's interesting how all those things intersect. So, at some point, you moved out of the school thing and started doing bands.
Yeah,
Was Wet Willie the first band, or did that take a while to evolve?
That learning curve. Again, my brother Jack, 2 years ahead of me, started some bands, and it got pretty good pretty fast with some of these guys. And the environment, when I look back at, okay, you put a little combo together, where do you play? House parties, birthdays, sometimes a school function.
Yeah,
we're going to have a sock hop.
Yeah.
We're going to have a little Harvest Moon hop. We're going to have a Christmas whatever. And they would ask us to play. But then there was some little things for money that we found. Johnson's Lake. You could play a Saturday night and make $50 for the whole band and walk away with $12, $15.
Right.
And go, hey.
Which at the time was like, hey, you mean we get paid and having fun?
I mean, it would be trading in Coke bottles and cutting the neighbors' lawns, which I was doing already.
Absolutely.
But so I was just thinking about Jack because he had a pretty cool band, and I would always hang out for their rehearsals.
Right.
See? And this, again, my dad's being supported by.
Being the sponge, soaking all this up.
Dad's going, okay, yeah, y'all can, whatever you want to bring the fellas over, and I'll help you set up or whatever. And then later on, it was a real garage band because we set up in the garage.
Right.
And Dad was helping. Well, let me help you set this up put your PA together for you.
Yeah.
But he had a band called The Vibrations, and they had a good tenor player too. But of course the Beatles were already at that point. They were out and making a big noise, and people were in love with the Beatles. So my brother and his band guys found, I don't know where they found this store, but they found a place they could buy these Beatle coats, and they were kind of iridescent gray with a sheen to it and no collar, and they wore their little ties and everything. And their drummer looked just like George Harrison. His name was Johnny something. And they got to open. This is the big night for them. I guess it was the auditorium back then. They got to open up for the Animals with Eric Burden. And boy, I mean, they were up there with their coats, and girls were screaming at them and everything. And then Chaz Chandler was having a problem with his bass amp. And my brother, he found good deals on all of his equipment. He had an amp peg, and it was one of these flip top things.
The B15.
B15.
Flip top.
It had a little light on top where you had a little logo. It was a really cool looking amp. But so Chaz, can I borrow your amp? He asked Jack. He said, oh, yes, sir. You want to borrow it? Yeah. Anything you need.
Yeah.
So, it was so cool when we think back. And he met Chaz and these guys, and that raised his visibility and
you got a
Mobile.
sniff of what it could be like to be out there. And of course, not everybody may remember this, but Chaz Chandler later on was the one who found Jimi Hendrix in New York and brought him to England and made him a star.
He did.
And I always thought that was an amazing story. And of course, there's the
remake movie. It really covers that.
Yeah, and the Animals, they definitely were on the edgy side of that stuff, in terms of just pushing the envelope and doing things like the House of the Rising Sun,
exactly,
and those kind of things. They were definitely more unpredictable. And Eric Burden went on to do a lot of different things. So at some point, your brother must have said, "Hey."
Yeah, well,
don't you want to be in the band?
Yeah. So when he was moving forward in his combos and his groups, come to their shows or hang out with them, I started when I was 15, and he was 2 years ahead of me. I just looked around at my guys in our marching band because they were all into rock and roll, and they were getting their guitars out of the Sears catalog.
That's right.
What were they called?
Silvertone
and a twin 12 amp was a pretty cool amp, and they had a starter one that I think it had an amp in the case or something. It was some combo thing.
Yeah, that's right.
But they had their Silvertones and a guy who was a percussionist in the high school band. He played drums for us, and two guys that were in the band. They were playing guitars, and my brother was playing bass. And actually, at first we had another bass player, and he was a trombonist really in the high school band. But I could tell he wasn't serious about it. Like he'd come late to practice or going, I don't know if I really want to do this. And that's when I said, "Bro, can you come help us out with this, do this show we're doing?" And we started working in the band together and going through. I mean, people would kind of fall off as they were going, well, I got to go to college, or
I need a real job.
I need a real job. I don't know if I'm going to this is just a hobby and I'm not really interested in it that much.
Right.
So that we went through some different players, putting together, here was a great drummer and then the best of the local players. And the final piece that we were looking for is the right lead guitarist. And we had one fellow who was really good, but we connected with Ricky Hirsch, who became Wet Willie's lead guitarist, as he just graduated from in Tuscaloosa, University of Alabama. He just graduated and came back to Mobile, and he played guitar, and he was interested in being a part of Weird. We said, "Come and just jam with us, and we'll see what it's like." And he had I can't remember, it was a Fender. I want to call it a Mustang or something.
Yeah, probably.
Kind of a turquoise.
Short scale, yeah.
But he started playing, and we're playing some kind of bluesy thing, Jimmy Reed probably. And he's bending strings, and he's, giving it that vibrato. I said, dang. Because some of these guys didn't even know how to do that, the way we're working with. Just learning how to do the B.B. King and the vibrato.
Sure. Oh, man.
And he was working on it. So we said, wow, we like that bluesy sound. So he was the final piece of it that we decided we've got the band we want. And we really started reaching out and trying to get bookings out of town.
Sure.
Down in Florida, up in Arkansas, we go up for a week to the clubs up there and do a week stint just to get tight.
Yep.
And work on our material.
Paying your dues.
Paying dues and kind of staying on track to try to be a professional, or let's make a record. And we were in that process because we listened to everything. Of course, it's the most wonderful time for music, I think, and especially in pop and rock music and blues. And so we were listening to all these things, and the Allman Brothers' first album came out in 1969.
Yeah.
And by that time, my brother and I were going to college at University of South Alabama, which is really a brand new school at the time. And they really didn't have a lot of curriculum for music, just some music history, and you could do not anything that I really wanted to get involved in. But a couple years in, it's 1969, we hear the Allman Brothers, and we listened to this album and soaked it up and just decided this is amazing, this great music, and they're making this music over in Macon, Georgia on this new label. And we made it our goal to get a connection with Capricorn Records. Somehow, because they were a new label with one group to start out with. But we loved their direction, and it turned out Ricky Hirsch had a fraternity brother who ended up in Macon and was a guitar player and starting to be a songwriter,
right,
who became part of their rhythm section over there in the beginning. And he was helping write songs for people. His name was Frank Friedman. And Ricky said, man, I know this guy, and he's over there. I think we should try to contact him and see what we could do about getting our foot in the door and maybe sending him a tape or meeting with him or whatever. So after a couple phone calls, Ricky said, you know what? They're really interested in seeing what we got. And they want us to come on over, just bring our equipment and come to Macon and do a live audition, because they have a stage set up in a rehearsal place that they use. So I'll never forget it. I mean, we're packing up, and we used to also rehearse at our keyboard. Our keyboard player was John Anthony, and he also played some guitar. But we were watching, as we were packing up into the van, we were watching a man walk on the moon. It was very moment in time, a parallel. What's going on? Nothing much. This guy just walking on the moon.
It's just a guy walking on the moon. No big deal.
No, that couldn't be true. Come on.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll just see that. Then jump in the van, and our parents are going, okay, good luck. And I wrote a song about it. I'll tell you later about this song when I was leaving town. But get in the van, drive over to Macon, get introduced to Phil Walden, Frank Fenner, these two heads. Frank's the A&R, one of the main guys, and Phil Walden is the number one, who started with Otis Redding and all that.
Very, very interesting career curve for sure.
It really was. And,
I mean, that was Capricorn. That was back in the era when you would buy something just because it was on a certain label because you liked everything else that label was doing.
Yeah.
I did that a bunch, because at some point Marshall Tucker came along.
Exactly.
And
that particular story, I'm going to get to a little story with that, because we auditioned for the label and we were nervous, but we had a repertoire of just starting to write some original music, and an instrumental and some variations on some copy, material, some cover songs that we would do different. Living in the USA, Steve Miller, stuff, right. Some harmonica in it, because I was playing harp. So we finished this, I don't know how long, we played 45 minutes or something for these guys, and they were, man, this is really good. And Frank Fenner, he was an English guy, but he was like, he used some kind of X-rated language, but and you can edit this if you want. But he called it cock rock, and he said, "American Rolling Stones." This is America, because everybody said I look kind of like Mick Jagger, and I was already crazy about him, and that's what made me want to play harmonica. But American Rolling Stones. So they signed us to the label, and we started planning with them, doing a record, making our first album. And they wanted to pick the producer. And so, pretty much we were going along with, hey, what do we do?
Yeah.
They're going, okay, we're going to get you a producer. And also, we'll get to the kind of legal contract things that were going on, which were ridiculous.
Yeah. Sign here.
This is the way we do it. Just standard. You don't have to. No, don't call an attorney. This is fine. Really. Look at me. You trust me?
Yeah.
The bullshit. but anyway, so with that thought in mind, that American Rolling Stones, let's get an English producer. And so Frank had all these connections with Atlantic Records. So he could call up and say, hey, can you see if Eddie Offord's interested? Eddie Offord produced Yes. Like in Palmer, and he's always prog rock. But they saw something, let's see what he can do with this.
Right.
Maybe he could, let's see, rock and roll. These guys are playing a lot of funk and blues and all kinds of stuff.
Right.
So we met with Eddie. He came over, and he liked the things that he heard. And we just figured, well, what the heck? Let's just go in and see if we can get this down and work with him. And he was willing. I mean, he could get good. Back then, Capricorn was a pretty, they didn't have the best equipment as far as the recording consoles and things. They were building, and therefore, I'll skip ahead a year. We're going to do our second album, and they were already expanding and putting a new board in. So we recorded in Muscle Shoals for our second album, over Muscle Shoals Sound. But Eddie came over there and reproduced that one also. It was a different environment or a different process working with him, because he knew R&B, but I mean, here we're in Macon. It was like, hey, Otis Redding lived here,
right?
And he was already gone a couple years or so or more when we got there. We got to know his wife, his widow, and his kids, and just that legacy. And then Little Richard was there, and Clarence Carter, and all these soul people. So we were absorbing all that, just being around it, and did our first album. We wrote some of the material, and Frank Friedman, who was like a staff writer for them, co-wrote some things with us and for us. I wanted to do one of the things that I picked, because I co-wrote one or two of those songs with some of the other band members, and one of the things I remember, because I wanted to feature harmonica, I wanted to do Jimmy Reed, Shame, 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 and we did a version of that I thought was pretty much a standout on that album. But I mean, we could talk about these.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because Eddie Offord was certainly known for, very, very different stuff than where you guys are coming from. So, different.
He was very good recording vocals, because, I mean, gosh, Yes was just all about this.
The big high vocals and all of that,
and then some intricate arrangement. Boy.
Sure. Yeah, very much so. Well, and so how many albums in was it when you came up with Keep On Smiling?
Okay. So, like I said, we went one more album with Eddie Alford at the helm. And by that time, we could feel he was just kind of going through the paces. And Yes was,
right.
Yeah, he was preoccupied. And we made a pretty decent album. But we did those 2 studio albums. We did an album. We did a live album in New Orleans. It was live at the Warehouse, which is a venue that the Allman Brothers were playing, and a lot of groups were playing that venue because it was big enough, and people just sat on the floor. It was like stadium seating. It was just wow. But the Allman Brothers had been playing there, so we booked a show with the Allman Brothers. It was the 30th and the 31st of December, leading into 1973.
Yeah.
And so this album we called Drippin' Wet Live. Johnny Sandlin produced it.
Right.
And he had what do you call it?
Like a truck, a remote truck.
Remote.
Yeah.
Remote truck set up and all that equipment. And we got to record 2 nights of music. And we chose the music very carefully. If we were going to do covers, we would do something that was it was like Freddie King, I'd rather be blind than to see you go. And nobody really knew that song. We did a good version of that. We did a blues that we put together from some bits and pieces called Making Hambone Blues. And oh God, that was a funny song, but just the fact that it was, like I said, just like Led Zeppelin, we were like borrowing little pieces of blues songs. But that album really got noticed, and it showed what the band really sounded like, because it's us on stage and we've got a crowd out there.
Comfortable,
really comfortable. Yeah. We played that venue before, and the crowd was really behind us. It wasn't like, who are you guys? Because we started really making a name in New Orleans. And so that album became a real door opener for us in a lot of ways, including to promote it, we need to go on a national tour. And so our booking agency got a call, and they were putting feelers out, but they got a call from Jeff Beck's management and saying, Jeff has a trio called BBA, was Jeff Beck, Tim Bogert, and Carmine Appice.
Yeah.
However you want to say it.
Appice. BBA.
And so BBA, they had that album out, and Superstitious was one of the big songs off of it. So they wanted us to open up, and man, we were so excited to get on that stage and follow or be on the road with them and get to meet Jeff Beck. And I don't know, it was great. So we did 30 or 40 shows. It was a long tour, and we would always stay and watch Jeff play and those guys, and just dropping our jaws.
Yeah,
it was loud as hell.
So amazing. I mean, I would have.
And
loved
through
to
that,
have seen the early versions.
And through
of
that,
Jeff
I
Beck.
got to be around Jeff, and he was admiring or enjoying my vocals and my harmonica, and asked me to come on stage and, hey, stick around. Bring your harmonica. I want you to play. We're going to do some blues just a rave up kind of encore thing.
Right. And
we'd do Blues Deluxe, or we'd do Red House, or whatever we came up with. One of his Superstition or anything. And by the end of the tour, I mean, we were, we'd have these conversations and hang out a little bit. And he became a big fan of the band back then. Even later on in the story, he would talk about, I always loved Shout Bama and these songs that we cut, that was my favorite. But at the end of the tour, we're saying goodbye, and, last night, I think we drank some champagne with him. He loves to drink champagne as a toast at the end of a show.
Right.
But he said, Jim, I want you to make a deal with me. Shake my hand. We're going to make an album together. Sometime, okay? I said, I'm in. I'm in. Let's do this. That was my kind of introduction to him, and he'd get to know me. So that was 1973. So Wet Willie goes on, and you can either flash forward or just know that the story goes on with Jeff.
Right.
So that
keeps coming back around.
Yeah.
Which is great.
He calls me when he's touring the stage. He said, I'm at the Fox Theater in Atlanta. Can you come over and God, sing Going Down With Me or something at the encore. I miss you, you know. And I did that once, and that kind of re-cemented everything. Wow, man, you're still good as hell. Yeah, you still got it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so then finally in 1984, I say this. I'm flashing forward here. We could cover this whenever, but he did call me, and his management wanted me to fly to New York, and they needed a vocalist for a project. And
that was the album Flash.
Yeah.
Right?
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was the album Flash.
I remember that, the cover on that with the blurry picture of Jeff and then hearing you on that. I mean, I knew who you were.
Right.
But I'd never heard you in that context. And, you know, as a huge Jeff Beck fan from, Yardbirds on, that was really.
Nile Rodgers produced it. I was trying to remember the name. Yeah. Nile Rodgers produced it. And this is the 80s now, right? So it has a real flavor of the 80s in there, and using synthetic drums and some of the things.
Sonically, yeah, for sure.
And so we were trying to make this, especially Nile was guiding it because he co-wrote a lot of these songs. And I sang 5 or 6 on the record. Rod Stewart sang People Get Ready, which was a pretty big hit for them. But this song, Ambitious, they cut the tracks without me there. So I had to fit in and sing in whatever key they cut them in. And Niall's voice is kind of lower, not no real high end. But then I was able to jump up an octave and do a big finale on the end of a lot. He's like on Ambitious, and which they made a big MTV video for, and they got a lot of. So that was flashing forward with that story.
But that the fact that you met Jeff in that kind of organic way where you're just opening up for him and you hit it off. I mean, those kind of coincidences can be life-changing. And it's like, and you continued that relationship with Jeff all the way through.
To the very end.
Yeah.
Almost.
I mean, I saw you at Municipal Auditorium a few years ago, the big package show with Paul Rogers. And it was great, but it was just so much fun, having seen and heard you a bunch of times, seeing you in that context with Jeff and singing those songs that, especially like some of the Rod Stewart stuff that for a lot of people would be untouchable.
Yeah.
And you just did them your own way. And never once did I go, gee, I wish I was listening to Rod Stewart. It was always.
I think looking back at that, I was a big Rod Stewart fan, and his solo work, but his work with Jeff.
Those 2 albums are 2 of my favorite albums of all time.
And you go back, and the beauty of kind of the ragged but a little rough around the edges, but that just made it cooler.
Yep.
And I think Ron Wood was on bass, and man,
very underrated bass player. When I finally got to meet him at an event, I said to Ronnie Wood, I said, man, I know everybody loves your guitar playing, but I really love your bass playing because those first 2 Jeff Beck albums were so good.
Oh, they were just magic. And for me, getting to cover some of those songs that Rod sang, I loved it because I could move in and out with kind of the way he did, but he put a lot of soul into it.
Yeah.
I mean, he was another guy influenced like a lot of people by Sam Cooke.
Yep.
And
with that raspy thing, that was so unique at the time. But I still, I think of those now. There was a famous night at the Boardwalk Cafe here in Nashville where you were playing with your band and Jeff Beck showed up, and
right.
everybody was like, the next morning, everybody was like all on their phones. You missed it, man. You missed it.
Yeah. That was a lot of fun. What happened was we did the album, released it, the Flash album, and toured very shortly, just a short tour in Japan, because we did a big guitar festival over there. It was one of the better known shows because they made a TV show out of it in Japan and filmed it. And so we did a few shows over there. And then, I know what. Jan Hammer couldn't continue because he was doing Miami Vice. And some of the guys, and I think Simon Phillips was busy too. So Jeff said, if I can't have those guys, I'm not going to tour anymore. I'm just not going to play in the U.S.
Right.
And he wanted to continue and play some shows all over in California. And so that kind of put a halt to promoting that album. And he told me, he said, okay, I'm coming to the States, and I want to hang out in Nashville. I'm going to spend a few days in Nashville. What do you think about that? I said, I'd love it. Come on. We'll show you around. Yeah. And we did. And it turns out, you want to go see some studios? And I don't know. He wanted to see Fort Nashboro and some historic stuff.
Right.
You wanted to see where this town, what it grew out of and how it began. But it was fun. And so we talked, Kenny Greenberg and I, and our band, the Prisoners of Love, which we still keep it going.
Yeah.
We've been playing shows
about that
with some original players in the band. But we had a gig that we had booked at the Boardwalk during the time that Jeff was here. And we started talking, and we just kind of pipe dreaming a little bit. And Kenny and I said, it'd be great. We should just see if Jeff would come in kind of incognito. And we don't have to, of course, we don't have to announce him. He wouldn't want that. Just say special guest. And we were working on some of the material on that album so we could play Ambitious and we'd play Superstition, a couple of those songs on the record with him on guitar. So I presented it to him. He said, okay, all right, let's do that. And I'll come in and I'll play, 30 minutes or less. I'll play these songs and just don't advertise me and we'll be great. So we get over there, and somebody said something to somebody, but,
yeah.
But it did get out, and it was so packed. And the word I got was there were people trying to break in through a air conditioning vent or something in the ceiling, like come through the ceiling to get in
Crawling
the club.
In.
And
it could have been me.
because it was one of those things.
Wow.
Did you hear? Wow. I can't believe. You mean the Boardwalk? I've got a picture, some photos from that night. And my son, Ryan, who loves to keep all things related to my legacy, photos and everything. He made a T-shirt for me with Kenny and me and Jeff in it. And it says, blah, 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 1986, whatever the year. It was 1986. Boardwalk Cafe. And Jeff still goes, he loved doing it when it was all done and said and done. He said, that was fun. That was great.
Yeah. Well, that's just, I just remember the word spreading like wildfire after it was over. It's like, man, where was I? I should have been there. But now that's a good segue. The Prisoners of Love, you've been doing that a long time.
Yeah.
And you do other touring things and other things, but you've kept this band going for, gosh, how long? When did you guys start doing that?
Well, I moved here in 1980. At that point, Macon, Georgia was not the music scene that it had been, and the label was already gone bankrupt and dissipated. And they later moved here.
Right.
Remember Capricorn?
That. Yeah.
And I did that album Rendezvous with the Blues in the later 90s.
That's right.
But they weren't involved then. But so Kenny Greenberg was in a circle. Actually, my sweet wife, Karen, was with me, and we heard him play with, I'm not going to remember this songwriter. He was a very good Nashville songwriter that Kenny was playing with for a period.
Yeah, not Pat McLaughlin.
No, this is before, but I'm going to look it up later. But he was playing one night at a club, and Karen and I said, we're going to go see Kenny, play. We knew who he was, but anyway.
And the Bobby Bradford Blues Band might have been after that, probably. Right. That was where I first heard Kenny.
So there were times that we go see Bobby Bradford because that was the funkiest, bluesiest thing in Nashville. And when Cantrell's was a viable venue here, we wouldn't go over there. But this time, I just remember going to see him at this club, and my wife and I were just listening, and he was blowing my mind. I mean, he's just so great. And Karen, like she's done many times since, said, you need to talk to him. Just go back and talk to him and see if he has any interest in doing some kind of a collaboration with you. And I did. And he said, hell yeah, let's see what we can do. And I'm trying to think, because he came up with the name Prisons of Love after it was either a James Brown song, it was an older R&B song.
Right.
But he liked the title. And we started with some other players along the way that didn't work out until we found Tommy Wells on drums.
Yep.
And then we found
Tommy.
And he was the guy, and we found Mike Joyce for bass.
Yep.
And he was the guy because another great bass player with a groove that could sing high.
Yep.
And do harmonies. And Kenny was singing too. But we started putting this together. And I remember Kenny rented a place on Blair. And had a rental house that he had a place in. It's big. It's still there. That house is still there. We used to go there and rehearse and sometimes at a rehearsal hall. But we were listening to everything from the Thunderbirds to Robert Cray, Omar and the Howlers. I remember some of the music. Kenny said, listen to this, man. We should do more of this. And then we started even writing some things. Kenny was writing wrote an instrumental called Walking the Plank. We played that one. He had another one called Coupe de Ville. This is when Kenny would sing lead on stuff, which was pretty rare.
Yeah.
But we started playing this circuit, which was the Boardwalk, the Bluebird, oh, God, Bogies.
Yep, Bogies.
And these free concerts downtown.
Summer Lights.
Summer Lights.
Kind of things,
We did some Summer Lights and things like that. But B.B. King's, when it was really having a heyday. It was.
And I mean, what I've always enjoyed about the Prisoners is that you've kind of incorporated all these different things that you've done over the years. Yeah. But it all sounds like you guys. I mean, it's a real band. And I mean, coming up and myself in the sort of band era, it's like, I always thought it was important, as much as fun as it can be to be in the studio and making records, playing live is sort of where it all comes back home, in so many ways. And I think that's one of the things that I really enjoy about seeing you in any situation is you bring that enthusiasm. Like, I'm just so darn glad to be here. And you've been doing it all this time and you still got that going.
Yeah.
Speaking of all this time, it is, I believe this year is the 50th anniversary of Keep On Smilin'.
Yeah. And I started just like, wait, 2024, 1974, 50 years. and that song is just, doesn't go away. Charlie Starr and Blackberry Smoke came with an idea, and they were going to do this tour, Spirit of the South. And they had a lot of special guests. I was one of them. And they had some of Almond Betts or Devin Almond's band.
Yeah.
And a lot of special guests come up. Larkin Poe.
Yep.
Those girls. So to promote it, they made an EP, and they did it at Capricorn Studios. 1 day worth of recording. And they did some Allman Brothers, and they did Marshall Tucker song. And they said, we want to do Keep On Smiling and Grits Ain't Groceries. And I'm telling you what, and I say this every time, they did the best version and did all their homework, every guitar part, even like this Benji Sparks. He's a slide guitarist,
right,
with Blackberry Smoke. On Keep On Smiling, he just gave me a big one. I mean, held out this long chord through the chorus. It was a brilliant addition. I wouldn't have thought about adding that, but anyway, there were so many great touches. Then he had the female singers, the Black Betties, two girls that just really, really, because we had the Williettes and you had that, hallelujah chorus on. But they did such a great job on that. The videos that they did and put out there, and they were honoring that song. And along the way, so many great instances. It was a song that Derek Trucks and Susan were doing on their tour all last year and some this year. Jason Isbell was doing it as an encore. It got put in one movie called Country Strong with Gwyneth Paltrow,
right,
and Tim McGraw. It was used in that movie. And now it's been used in a new Amazon Prime movie, the remake of Roadhouse.
Oh, wow.
With Jay Gyllenhaal as lead.
Right.
And I wasn't aware of it at first until somebody said, they're playing your song in this movie. I said, really? And I said, somebody sent me a little clip of it. And I said, yeah, that's Rockin' Dobsey from New Orleans. He's one of these Cajun guys that plays a washboard and all that. I heard him do a version of it on this cruise we did last fall called the Big Easy Cruise. And he was playing my song. I said, hey, man, thanks for playing my song. But maybe at that point he was already recording or knew he was going to have it in this movie. Nonetheless, it's really featured in this movie.